Welcome everybody. Today we're jumping into Unit 4, Day 3, and this is about 19th century society with some politics thrown into there as well. So there is a variety of topics that are going to be talked about in this having to do with society. I'm not going to get into most of those in this video because I'll let you go through the slides presentation and read some of that. The big major focus of this, though, is going to be talking about slavery in the United States and what that really looked like during this era. And as I mentioned in the welcome video, you're going to see that during this time you have a major growth in slavery as a result of the invention of the cotton gin. If you've never gotten to experience what raw cotton looks like, basically cotton is full of all these very tiny black seeds. Now, before the invention of the cotton gin, you had to have somebody that would go through the cotton and pick out all of these black seeds. Usually a slave would be the one going through and picking out all these little seeds. Very tedious, and it limited the amount of cotton that a farmer could plant because that took a long process getting out all of those little seeds. Well, with the invention of Eli Whitney's cotton gin, you're going to see basically what that did is you ran it through a machine, and it used almost like like a comb type thing that would pull out all of the seeds. Now you think, well, that's great. That means less slaves. You don't have to have as many going through cotton picking out the seeds. But no, that's not what happened. It actually became much easier to grow a lot more cotton now, which is what Southerners in the Deep South did, grew a lot more cotton now, which meant they needed a lot more slaves to work on that. And that's why you're going to see the term King Cotton come out during this time, because cotton really was king. In fact, cotton would be king pretty much through the beginning of the Civil War. You're going to see at the beginning of the Civil War that Britain and other countries realized that they could start importing cotton from other like Asian areas, that part of the world, Asia, and that type of thing, and that they could get cheaper cotton, but just a good quality from there. So you'll even see during the Civil War that the United States at the beginning backs their money currency with cotton. That's how important cotton was during this time. So slavery during this time, I go through and talk a lot about what slavery looked like, how the numbers of slaves were increasing, what slavery looked like for a slave, and the effects of slavery on African Americans during this time. You're also going to see the issue of slavery popping up. Well, first of all, in talking about slavery, you're going to see James Madison would call it the peculiar institution. Some would call it a necessary evil. And you're going to see repeatedly, and actually you see this in our founding fathers, when they write about slavery, they talk about the great disdain that they have for slavery. Thomas Jefferson wrote about that. Patrick Henry, who was a slave owner, also wrote about that. But they still continue the practice. And you're going to see the major driving force behind a lot of that is going to be the wealthy working in these plantations, because slavery represented a cheaper form of labor to them. Plus, in the South, you just didn't have the free labor that you had in other areas of the country, because other areas of the country were actually having immigrants come into them, whereas in the South, immigrants weren't coming to work on plantations. They were going into the North to work in the new factories there. So with slavery and the oddity of slavery, you're going to see slavery is going to become a major political issue. And the reason that it's going to become that is because of extending out into the West. You're going to have the Louisiana Purchase that happens, and then there's going to be the question of, does slavery extend out into the Louisiana Purchase? And also the question of, like, what are we going to do in the future? Like with slavery, states, that kind of stuff. And if you remember, the Northwest Territory that had been founded under the Articles of Confederation, it had actually outlawed slavery in those Northwest Territories. So that's going to lead to a fight and what is going to be known as the Missouri Crisis and eventually the Missouri Compromise. And what you had in that situation happening is Missouri wants to apply for statehood to the United States, but they want to apply for statehood as a slave state. At the same time, you're going to have Maine apply for statehood, and Maine wants to apply for statehood as a free state. Because of the break between the Senate and the House of Representatives, you're going to see that Northern representatives in the Senate decide, hey, we are going to block Missouri from becoming a state unless they decide to get rid of slavery. And then you're going to see that Southerners say, well, we can block Maine from becoming a state. Now, why was they so intent on blocking these states? Well, the concern was that you had this balance of power within Congress between free and slave states. And the worry was that if you let new states enter into the Union, that it could tip the balance one way. So Southerners were scared that, hey, if the northern free states outnumber us, they will go to ban slavery. And you're going to see in the South, in the North, the fear was the other way. So basically, you're going to have both sides scared if there wasn't this balance of power. Now, in is going to step Henry Clay into this situation, this crisis that we would have. And Henry Clay will step into this and work at an agreement. Now, that agreement is that Maine would enter as a free state. Missouri enters as a slave state, and then it sets the Missouri Compromise line, the 3530 line. And basically what that line does is it extends to the end of the Louisiana Purchase, so it does not go all the way to the West Coast, because at that time we did not have that land. And it says any new states to enter the Union below that line will be slave. Any new states to enter above will be free. Now, this is an agreement, again, that works and keeps people happy. It would work for 30-ish years before there would be major issues again with this. But again, this is kind of like a precursor to what you're going to see happen later on, as this issue of slavery, as well as other issues, but slavery is going to be the major focus that's going to be a big issue between the North and the South. And you're going to see in one of the first things I have you do in this is read Thomas Jefferson's Fire Bell and the Night Letter. And in this, Jefferson, even though he hadn't been president for 16 so years, he's still very extensively writing back in Monticello, and he sees the Missouri Compromise and has great concerns about the Missouri Compromise. Now, Jefferson wasn't worried about the issue of slavery and all of that that he was worried about creating a line that goes across the country. He said is going to create a division between the two between the two parts of the country. And we now know, looking back, that it did create this divisive line between the country. So Missouri Compromise, again, definitely one that you need to know and the effects of that. Another important thing to note when you look at that is that when you look at the Missouri Compromise line, that Missouri is actually above that line. Missouri was the exemption to the Missouri Compromise line that would be there. So enjoyed reading through this and looking at slavery, Missouri Compromise, and then getting into a little bit about what American culture would look like during that time. Again, that's something we're going to keep coming back to and get a little bit more in detail on the corresponding days to this unit. So again, I've told you before, if you have any questions, please let me know, especially as you go through this. You also have a discussion board today, so make sure that you answer and engage in that. Otherwise, I hope you have a fantastic day.